I'm Cate Roman. I'm professor of graphic design, and I am in my 15th year at Woodbury. And last year, I took a year-long sabbatical. So this is both a sabbatical and a faculty development grant talk. And the grant paid for my ability to increase some of my technological skills, as well as pay for some materials for what I was exploring. And, oops, sorry, one second. I will share my screen. Got it. Okay. And so can everybody see my title slide? Great. All right. So the project turned out to be called Little Paintings Everywhere, excerpts from my library. It didn't start out this way, but as Bruce Mao says, let events change you. And I certainly did over the year of pre-COVID into COVID. So this was an exploration of art and technology for me, and it had three segments to it. First was the research segment, then was an increase in my technological skill level, which means I had to learn 2 software programs, After Effects and Artivive, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then the segment where I was creating, making in the vein that I've been working in, which is I sculpt with language, and I look at the meaning of language in terms of a visceral experience and how I can create experiences of language beyond the words themselves. So I had some questions I was posing for myself. Do I work with my sculptures? Do I work with paintings? Do I work with quotes, poetry? These are all things that I've touched on in my career as a designer and an artist. So in this first segment, I started to look at where augmented reality was showing up in our world. And this has become something more and more interesting to me over time. And in 2017, we saw Gatwick Airport use augmented reality as a technology to help passengers find their way through the terminals. They're very complicated, and I just have a single photograph here to show you how that played out. And then in 2018, we began to see augmented reality being used by KLM in their baggage check, where you could just take your phone and have an augmented reality piece so that, okay, I can't see the chat. So somebody's chatting. I'm gonna just pause for 1 second to see what happened. This happens to me a lot.
I'm just giving you a little more time, Cate, so you haven't.
Oh, thank you. So I don't feel like I have to rush.
Yes.
All right, I'll go back to my share. Thank you. Okay, so here we are. So KLM used augmented reality for baggage checks so that if you had their app on your phone, you could photograph your bag and compare it to a bag that would fit into the overhead compartment, basically. So as a designer, you can see that these things are super interesting to me. But what really got me was walking into an Apple store and finding out that artists had partnered with the Apple store in their augmented reality experiences of locations. And this is a photograph of a Nick Cave piece that you can experience when the Apple store is open again, so that you can hold your phone up if you have the app, and you can see all this amazing artwork pop around the room. And if you move your phone around, you get all this wonderful, lively experience of the artist's work. This is Nick Cave's piece called A Mass, and this is Sarah Rothberg, who created not just augmented experiences of sitting in an Apple store, but also a course. And this is the first course I took in learning to work with Swift playgrounds to create my own scenes using pre-made artwork that Sarah had created. And that kind of really got my creative juices flowing. Then I was looking at poet Giorno, which you may or may not have heard of, and how he took the written word into the augmented reality space. And this is a piece that was created also through Apple and these augmented reality art pieces. So he was a performance artist and poet. So I'm going to just play a little snippet of this.
Lighter, everyone gets lighter. Everyone is light.
So in the segment 2, after I got inspired by all this research, I realized I did not have the technological skills to make any of this kind of work myself. And so I took a class in After Effects. Thankful to Woodbury University for giving me the grant to be able to do this. After Effects is a very deep program. Some of you know this as animators. I did not, but it is a big part of motion graphics and graphic design. And I thought it was time for me to level up. And then I learned a little piece of software called Adobe, where I could take my animations and then create augmented realities that would react to either my sculptures or paintings. So important to note, and I want you to know, is that none of the work I'm going to show you is finished. These are all explorations and direction that created even more questions, but it's a super exciting direction for me. So this is the first piece of kinetic type that I created, and it does have some sound to it, so hopefully that will come through. And this was me learning Adobe After Effects and applying it to what we call motion graphics in the graphic design world, kinetic type.
Anticipate this. Easy ease yourself, fool. Animate those eyeballs straight to heaven. HTTP 1080 29.7. And here's a tool tip. Animation's got no filler. Cause I'm a keyframe killer.
So that was my first little piece of animation. Then I took one of my paintings. This is an older painting. It's a little encaustic piece where I look at the form of typography. And I created my first augmented reality piece. So this is, again, not ready for prime time, but I'm sharing a lot of process with you today. So now that I had a little bit of knowledge of After Effects and Adobe, the questions really became, how do I work with this experience of language that I'm so interested in? Paintings or sculptures, quotes or poetry. This is one of my more recent sculptures in this garden here. It's about 8 feet tall, and the original plan was to create an augmented reality piece around this. And this is a piece of my artist statement here. I'm fascinated by our imperfections in written and spoken language, especially how we often get things wrong when we're trying to communicate with each other. And so I build things that hopefully create visceral experiences of these communications. And they're purposefully ambiguous. And I'm trying to get at that thing that I am most aware of, but I can't put into words. And after some contemplation, I decided that I was going to move towards painting. And this is when I went to my library. So this was about the time of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter. And I was deeply affected by this, and I found it difficult to work. And then, of course, COVID and everything else, a daughter going off to college in the midst of COVID. There were a lot of things going on for me. So I went to my library and I pulled out a book that has influenced me over the years, which are these beautiful quilts that are made by these women of Gee's Bend, Alabama, which is a small, isolated, rural Black community. And they've been creating these masterpieces for decades and decades and have passed this on. And so I then started pulling out more books from my library and found that I had been deeply influenced by a lot of African-American poets and artists and writers and thinkers, and sort of took some influence from that to move forward with my work. So I began a series of paintings that were influenced by what I was looking at, and these paintings became little paintings everywhere. These are 4 inches by 4 inches. They're tiny little paintings. And the idea was that these could be dotted around a community, and each would have an augmented reality experience that would show a poet, a poem, or a quote, or an inspirational statement from one of these people from my library. And this is the Seeing Red series. There are currently 9 of these paintings. And from here, I began to explore then what the augmented experience would be. And so here is a kinetic type study and a painting study. This is as far as I've gotten in terms of my exploration of each of these paintings. So this doesn't have sound. Yeah. And finally, I wanted to add with this, technology like art is a soaring exercise of the human imagination. This is something that I think about all the time. And I feel like, perhaps many of you feel the same way, that I'm always a little bit behind the 8 ball with regards to technology. And there's always so much more to learn. And for that, I'm grateful. Thank you to Woodbury and the Faculty Development Committee and everyone who supports me and my work.